So I was watching Stranger Things last week, and it was interesting to see like how not only was it directed as nostalgia towards Generation X and older millennials, but it's also a form of nostalgia for baby boomers in the sense that it's referring to their young adulthood when they had children. But for Generation X, they're nostalgic, obviously, about their childhood and watching movies like E.T. In their childhood. But the weird thing is that's almost a form of hyper nostalgia, because it's not a nostalgia over us doing things like going out and exploring. Our memories, our nostalgia is about watching movies about the baby boomers, and even before that, of the children who actually did things before there was this mass of movies. I was thinking about how my parents got indoctrinated with Sunday school and things like that. But Generation X and Millennials, they didn't get so much of that, but they got the first mass, I guess you would say, brainwashing about how, because their view of what the world is based on all of those movies they watched when they were children, and then they got out in the real world and they realized that things aren't that simple, because they make everything seem so simple in these movies. So that's related to, because people are always bashing on millennials, but that's really why they're disgruntled. Because what do you expect? You're told your whole life that you can make something of yourself, but that's not entirely. They were told if you got like the college degree and did this and did step and then this step, then they were going to get this job or this kind of job, and then they were going to do this. But every single parent and every child is doing the same thing. So it always felt a little suspicious when I was younger, but still, you're just doing what everyone else is doing. You're just going to college and like taking out the debt because of the messed up thing is they're not like people making you a promise of anything. It's just something that's been absorbed by you as a child all the way through young adulthood. You see it really as a problem when you're in the mental health field, because a lot of like the delusions that people have are really, they're not like a mental illness. They're basically just, they watched a lot of movies when they were younger, and they're on the bottom, usually on the bottom end of like the academic intelligence scale. Like they're not gonna be physicists or anything like that. So they might get paranoid about something, say like that, thinking that you're a CIA agent, and then you're trying to infiltrate and get them or something. But that's because they think the world is interesting like that, you see. You get this impression that things are interesting, and then you go out in the world, and then you're like, God, everyone's boring. You could do so much more. So the next thing I want to talk about is House of Cards. I'm rewatching season 1, and you really get a sense of how they made like a slot for each generation. It's really about the will to symbolic power over others, and how even the people that seem on this good side, like the people at the newspaper, it exposes that they want a form of symbolic power also. And they draw this arbitrary line where even within the ranks of what's okay and what's not okay. And they all agree that this isn't okay, except maybe Zoe Barnes. She kind of, that's why she's able to get ahead, because she's willing to make deal with the corrupt baby boomer, Kevin Spacey. So their careers haven't advanced, at least the girls, because she's not willing to do that, and she seems to be part of Generation X. So this difference between the generations is a stereotype or an archetype, archetypical difference that was obviously thought out when they wrote the show. And then there's the Generation X guy, and he sort of stands for integrity, like at all costs. He really believes. That's the hardest one to watch, like in season 2, where he gets that prison sentence, and he wants to keep on fighting. That one's the hardest one to watch, because you see the girl kind of, she gets scared and wants to just, she doesn't want to deal with that. So then obviously Zoe Barnes dies in season 2. And then you think, how much farther can these shows go? I mean, once you've exposed sort of how politics is and how people are, you can't really you can't go backwards. So it feels like something new has to emerge, because it's never just stayed stagnant. And people talk about Generation Z maybe being 14 or 12 or something, and they're like hyper millennials. They're like millennials on steroids. But that's just because they're children with these tools. But they're going to get bored. By the time they're 18, they have to be into something else. It's not just going to keep on. There's not going to be like hyper Pokemon. It's not just going to keep on going that way. So the Generation Z is actually going to be the first generation that goes into voting, grasping that the world is corrupt, and that there's lots of forms of deception out there, especially directed towards young people. And society is not your friend, at least not right now. And so they're going to know that the elections are rigged before they are able to even vote. But every generation needs something to distinguish themselves from the previous ones. And since all the fake possibilities have been played out since Generation X, like, it feels like there's 4 generations. Generation Great, and then there's the baby boomers, and then Generation X, and then millennials. And I like to describe them as sports. Like, one's soccer, then you got football, then you got baseball, and then you got basketball. And the heyday for football was the baby boomers. That was like the 80s. And then Generation X dominated baseball. And now the millennials are dominating basketball. But you could also tell something about their personalities. Where basketball and football are more penalty oriented, the millennials and the baby boomers, I call them boomocrats and millennicrats. Now, I'm not saying all baby boomers and millennials are the same. I'm saying there's an archetype. So, like, Zoe Barnes is like the millennicrat archetype. She's like, when she starts butting heads with the baby boomer and he calls her a cunt, she posts that's on Instagram or whatever, Twitter, and so she's all about, like, she's all supposed to remind us of all that gender politics stuff. But their way of being a bureaucrat is on a personal level, what people can and can't say or tell you what you are. Whereas the baby boomer is more like Hillary Clinton. They exist on a more impersonal scale, and they talk in slogans. I see them as droids, almost. And the Millenniumcrats, they're like Cylons. They're more human-like artificial intelligence. So artificial intelligence is there to conceal that or unveil, like as a metaphor, that two of these four generations are artificially intelligent. They're like, or they lean that way, meaning they are operators. They're not evaluators. They remember rules and then they can generalize and apply them. And the Millenniumcrats are more nuanced at it, and they learn through experience more. And the Boomers are more crude, and they have more social norms. They're affected by social norms also. And where Zoe Barnes is obviously not. She doesn't have any morals. She doesn't have any like societal morals. Like she'll give it up to get ahead, sort of. You see what I mean? And yeah, what the hell was I talking about? Okay. So Generation G or Generation Great, they're the crude and personal evaluators. They're evaluators in the sense that like they mail all the things that look cool, and they are machinists. That's like where you get Tesla and all that stuff. And I think this is a really long generation, or it's the first generation. Uh, Extending back to whenever we cared about writing stuff down. History is like, our society, the social artifice is language itself. Whenever we speak, we're already engaged in the social map that's not part of nature. Like, we say, I own this, you own that, you can stay here for this amount of time interval, for this amount of pieces of paper, and this our symbolic power over how the world is artificially divided up into objects and property. Yeah, that's all. That's not part of nature, but we take it more seriously than nature. Um, so the Gen Xers are the nuanced personal evaluators. And you see how the millennials are sort of like a replication of that. They're the nuanced personal operators. You see, Generation X wasn't really about tattoos and things like that. And you see, like, the tattoos kick in with the millennials, mostly. Tattoos are sort of what scars are in reality, but in the social imaginary. Uh, and one of the other differences. So right now, Generation X, Generation